CRM Audio, the Microsoft Business Applications and Power Platform podcast. I'm Joel Lindstrom here today with George Dubinsky. George, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. I'm just dancing to your wonderful music. Who wrote that?
It was some guy on Fiverr that I paid to write a song about Ben Vollmer.
Oh, that's right. That's right. That's right.
So we have last week we had a podcast where Sean Tabor and I talked about the Wave 2 2020 release plan, and I think it was a pretty good episode. You should go listen to it if you didn't. But the one topic that we really were not qualified to talk about was the Portals web API, and I believe my quote was, "Why do we need an API for Portals when we have a SDK for CDS already and a web API?" So you're here to tell us why we need a Portal API.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, I'm
See
sorry.
any other hosts sitting around here?
No, I'm just looking around. I'm just kind of anyone? No. Look, the interesting part is that Portal Web API it's scheduled for public preview. Like you see it in December, right?
Right.
But it's winter in Australia, but definitely not December. But you already have the Portal Web API preview. So we can include a URL inside the show notes, but basically it's available now. And its ability to call effectively CDS API, well, kind of CDS API. I'll talk in a second. So its ability to call directly into CDS using API, which kind of resembles Web API, the CDS Web API, directly from the portal. And when I say directly from the portal, I mean from the JavaScript. From the pages. So you have endpoints that you can call. Well, not only from JavaScript, you can call it from anywhere. I assume you can call it from third-party applications. It doesn't need to be the same web application. Maybe it does need to be. So the idea behind it, ability to call into this web API, is to give developers ability to perform CRUD operations. Currently, you don't have, within the Portal framework or Power Apps Portal framework, you don't have ability to perform any operations except retrieve or retrieve multiple, which is part of the liquid language. So when you're creating a page or a page template, you can kind of fine-tune your retrieve operations. You can run fetch XML, you can extract data, you can do certain things, you can lay it out, so you can feed data back to the browser, right? If you want to update, your only option to update is the form. So you're kind of limited to what you can do when you want to create, update, and delete is a special operation. You can delete it. You can add a button that deletes the record, but you don't control what's going on. You don't control how it's happening. You just control where to place the button, so to speak. And for create and update, you only control which form to kind of display, but you don't have any ability to create inline operations or do some batches. I'll give you the most common use of that, most popular. And I should really finish the parts that I have on editable grids, right? So inside the portal, one of the common requests is to create an editable grid, which would be equivalent of the editable grid that you have inside CDS or a model-driven app or Dynamics 365. Now, the typical example would be, say, you are purchasing products. So you have something like you build an invoice, for example. Right, so you have invoice lines. So you want to be able to build those lines and then submit those, and the invoice would go through. So you want kind of editable grid experience, but you can't have it in portals because you need to be able to talk to backend, to CDS, as you build in that grid. So you need to be able to build those lines in. And I'm saying, like, before you create invoice. If you have an invoice and you have this disconnected experience, you know the experience, the old one without editable grids. I have an invoice, I want to add a line, I go into the form to add the line, I added the line, I'm back into invoice, I add another line, and it's just terrible experience for users, right? So what you want is kind of add the line, all in line, and it's kind of the same. So I want to be able to create invoice details without going into the form on the fly. That's what those operations allow you to do. That was a long-winded explanation. It was horrible.
No, that makes sense. And in my defense last week, this documentation wasn't published when we did our last episode. But the documentation, which I put a link in the show notes for, it clarifies that Portal's web API operations are limited to entities related to data. They're not for integration purposes. So they're designed for creating rich user experiences in Portal pages. So let me ask you this question. So security-wise, is this open up any new threats? For example, can some of the external connect this API, or is it limited just to being used with controls that you develop for the Portal?
Okay. So I'm just reading about that. So details what's been published. One of the things, and like you can forget about what I said, you can access it from elsewhere. No, you cannot, because all web API calls must include cross-site forgery token, CSRF token, which is basically combats the cross-site forgery. So you can't call this web API, Portal web API, from outside. You need to be talking to the portals. So you can call it from the same page that you display, kind of. You can't leave this site effectively. Now, when you call Portal Web API, which looks kind of similar, they try to do it very similar to create a similar structure to a web API, CDS web API. So developers kind of feel comfortable using that API. So the Portal's web API talks to the entities in CDS, but it applies entity permissions. So, for example, if you don't give anonymous access to any of the entities, it's a reg scenario, but let's say you say I'm locking down Portal completely, so entity permissions, there is no public access to any of the entities, full stop, right?
Okay.
Then no matter how hard you try and bash this web API, nothing will get through, because the entity permissions will just block it completely. So you won't be able to access if you didn't configure anonymous users to have, for example, any create permissions anywhere, then you won't be able to create anything. Then, for example, you can start opening up bit by bit. You have a form on the contact us page, and you want kind of a pop-up experience on the fly. So you want to call this web API, a Portal web API on the fly from JavaScript. So what you would do, you add entity permission for anonymous users to be able to create leads, for example, right? So that gives you ability to call web API on leads entity, send, create message. And again, you control the fields that go through. So it's a very tight control. Obviously, it's not it doesn't have mechanisms against things like denial of service attack. That would happen much earlier than that. So Microsoft, because it's a Azure web app, it would have a firewall and mechanism to protect against denial of service. Let's say repeated access from the same heavy hammering from the same IP address or something like that. Some indicators of heavy attack. So that would have some built-in protection against that. So as far as the data is concerned, you go through multiple roles. So you go through the Portal Web API. So there's a limited number of operations you can do. Then you define which entities you have access to. Entity permissions are applied, and checked against the web roles that you have, your users have. I gave example to anonymous user, but if you're authenticated user, you might have one of the multiple web roles. Then you can allow people to do some additional operations with the web API. So there's a heavy dependencies on what's going on. So the risk is, to me, it's not much greater than anywhere else. I mean,
yeah, so yes, like limited it to only being available inside once you're inside. And once you're inside, there's a lot more things you could do anyway. So,
true. And keep in mind that none other than marketing portals, right, that are not quite the same Power Apps portals as the rest of them. The marketing portal has been using this approach for months now, right? So they're using the same approach. There's a kind of API layer, and they call this API that in turn calls CDS API. So it's kind of proxying. It's proxying the API. That's what it is, right?
So one of the other big portal announcements is PCF controls and portals. Is this related to that? I mean, is the portal API necessary to support PCF controls?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that PCF controls do, they kind of, when you create PCF controls, you build in kind of HTML on the fly. You effectively build in, think like what you had with web resources. You have web resources that talk to something and so on. With PCF control, you effectively get very fine control over the code that gets generated and HTML that gets generated. You kind of sit in very, very close to the surface, and you generate layout and you generate code. Now, this code, or rather PCF controls, they have these layers. They have this multiple layers that allow you to talk to CDS, right? So right. You have so PCF controls, by definition, they can be bound, they can be unbound, but they have a number of operations to be able to talk to CDS. So without that, PCF control is as good as a brick. It probably will still render. It just won't be able to talk to the data, right? So it won't be able to get any data. So if you have, let's say, a smart drop,
read-only empty editable grid.
Yeah, that's right. So like if you have a drop-down control, let's say a super smart drop-down control that creates a wonderful experience when dependable drop-downs. So it will display drop-down control most likely, but absolutely nothing bound. So whatever control gets by default, that would be it. So no access to the data for PCF control, and no updates either. So if when PCF controls binds to the data, it can update it as well. So it kind of can send data back. So that you lose completely communication between control and the data. So rendering is fine, but what you're rendering is nothing. So yeah, definitely you need this layer for PCF controls to work. What would be interesting to see, because API, as I said, API is kind of similar, but not quite the CDS web API. So what would be interesting to see how PCF controls are going to consume that kind of proxy layer. Are they going to have if then else, or what's going to happen? I don't know. It's yet to come. But definitely it's there. People started exploring it. Anyone tried it already? Because I've seen like one or two articles. People have tried it.
One post in the forums by Andrew Butenko that he's something about a PCF control of a portal. So I don't know if he's actually done it or was playing with it or what. But the interesting thing I've actually seen over the last week, 2 or 3 people asking questions in the Power Users forums who are using Power Apps portals but aren't using model or canvas driven apps, model driven or canvas apps. So they're coming at this like, how do I integrate with the portal, or how do I trigger a flow when a change made on the portal? And I've answered that. Well, you need to go into Common Data Service, and it's the same as with the model-driven app. So I think this will have the effect of making the PowerApps portals a much more interesting platform to a lot of people.
It's kind of interesting that you picked it up. There are a couple extra things I wanted to mention. One is when you read what's available on the portals, is create, update, delete. So we have CUD, not CRUD. And there is associated, disassociate. And that was asked, like, why did it happen? And that's pretty much a team prioritizing what to expose, because we already have retrieve. Remember, I mentioned earlier that liquid language gives us ability to retrieve. So it's never been a challenge.
So what are the options we have now for integrating with other things besides CDS? Is it just use traditional integration methods or virtual entities and display that in the portal, or any?
Sorry, when you say an integrate, what do you mean by integration?
I want my portal also to connect to ServiceNow and let me create a ticket in ServiceNow.
Does ServiceNow have API? I mean, it's depends how you build in your portal pages. You can obviously build some. I give you an example. So for one of the customers, they are in property business, so they have image-heavy portal, right? It's very heavy. Imagine the property images, multiple per property, and so on. Thumbnails, different different sizes, different ratios for the images, high-quality images. So a lot, right? So gigabytes of images, basically, we're talking about. We need to be able to scale them, allow people to upload, allow people to resize, to edit, change ratio, crop, all this sort of stuff. Basically, portals have very limited support for that kind of operations, right? There is attachment support, but it's limited. We tried. It doesn't perform that well when you're talking about dozens and hundreds of images. So we switched to external service provider that specializes in serving images for industries like property rentals and things like that, right? So we switched to that and we integrated, and basically it's just JavaScript, some work in JavaScript, either using jQuery or React or whatever your favorite framework is. Marketing portals, they use Angular, for example. So whatever your favorite framework is, you're fine. So that's one way you integrate on the front end. You kind of bring external services at the front end. If you're interested in the back end integration, then remember this. You probably heard the companion app. Yeah. The notion that's been in place for a long time, but now it's official because portals support authentication. Portals can be themselves identity server. I really need to kind of create a series of small posts that explain people exactly what that means and how does it work. The idea is that you can create a web app completely independent of the portals that will use portals effectively as authentication, or will use the same authentication mechanism as portals. Let's say portals use Azure AD B2C. Your web app can use Azure AD B2C. When someone logs into your app, you will know the portal identity of that user. So you will know the contact inside the portal, right? So you'll be able to embed iframe, for example, these services inside your portals, and the identity will kind of flow on. So you will know who the contact is. And you can transfer between the portal and your website, and you will know who the user is. So that's kind of integration, kind of either embedded or kind of flow-like integration, the process integration, which gives you ability to deploy external sites. So that's kind of loose integration.
Because portals doesn't do everything you need it to do.
Correct.
Portals what it's good for, and then build a Azure web app or something.
Yeah. And the last but not least, what you mentioned is kind of working with virtual entities. Not so much virtual entities, but talking about FinOps. If you go to the portal types and you start provisioning a portal, one of the portal one of the portal templates would be the FNO template. And I don't have FNO, so I can't provision that. But the idea is that you use the dual write.
It's still right, yeah.
So effectively, you have either virtual or other entities that, or physical entities that tie back to whatever you have and bring it all together. So there's multiple options to integrate, right? So, and Web API, the portal Web API, it gives us ability to create a powerful integrations where the portal code or front end talks to the back end. So they opened it up. You were able to do it before. It's just you had to hide your whole code inside, plugins and things like that. So it wasn't impossible, but definitely not the front end developer friendly. So someone like Andrew, who is good at front end, well, he's good at back end as well, but let's assume he's not. So he would be then the front end developer who needs to talk to the Web API, and the only way to talk to it before that was through the back end. Now we have direct way to talk to it.
So we've gone from high code to code. We're not to low code with it yet.
I don't think it's ever going to happen for the portals. I mean, portals are already low code, so I'm not sure that we can get any lower than that. Like you have entity forms and you have entity forms and you have web forms and you have entity lists. So that's as low code as it gets.
I mean, the what a lot of people assume, because it's called PowerApps portals, is that I can use connectors and do components and Canvas app stuff in a portal.
Not yet. Not yet.
But George, this has been fun. Thank you for clarifying what that means, since Sean and I didn't know what we were talking about the portals last week. So thanks for joining us on CRM Audio.
Well, you're welcome. And as you can see, I didn't know much what I'm talking about either.
Check the show notes if you want the official answer.